24, baby. Good to be with you. Good to, chat virtually or something. Okay, we're on the topic of some particular questions about receiving the Blessed Sacrament or the use of the Blessed Sacrament. The first question, which we'll address kind of quickly, is whether or not something that happens to a person or a dream that they have while they're asleep would prevent them from receiving the Blessed Sacrament like the next day. Okay, I think the general answer, the general response to this is no, it doesn't. And the reason for that is somewhat straightforward, which is a person, in order to be culpable for an action, has to do that act, right? It has to be a human act, something that they consent to. And if somebody doesn't consent to doing something, then they're not culpable for it. And so that would be when somebody's asleep. When somebody's asleep, they're not capable of consenting to some particular thought or action or deed or whatever. So somebody does something while they're sleepwalking, they're not culpable for those things, or even when somebody's awake and somebody forces another person to do something they don't want to do, they're not culpable for that. They were forced to do it. Like if I hold your arm and I slap you in the face, it's like, okay, you didn't do anything, right? It's like it was something done unto you. Okay, so I think the same principle applies when asleep. And so that's that question. The next question that Aquinas gives is whether food or drink taken beforehand hinders the receiving of this sacrament. So here he draws an interesting distinction between something that hinders the reception of the sacrament in itself, which would be mortal sin, or as a kind of precept or a norm of the church, which would be fasting. So that's just a helpful. I think people get this distinction intuitively, and you see this a lot when you're giving Holy Communion to the sick, because the obligation to fast when you're giving Holy Communion to the sick doesn't apply, because the reasons for which we fast are not as pressing as the reception of the sacrament for someone who's dying, right? Okay, so here are the reasons why the church prohibits receiving food for 1 hour before receiving the sacrament. First, as St. Augustine says, out of respect for this sacrament, so that it may enter into a mouth not yet contaminated by any food or drink. So it's a matter of respect. Kind of like you wouldn't chew gum when you go and meet a dignitary. It's just not really respectful. Or if you're going to a really fancy dinner, you wouldn't, you would dress nicely out of respect. Okay. Second, because of its signification, i.e. to give us to understand that Christ, who is the reality of this sacrament, and his charity ought to be first of all established in our hearts. Seek first the kingdom of God. All right, so abstaining from food before receiving Jesus in the Holy Eucharist reminds us of the primacy of Jesus to be present in our hearts. Third, this maybe is not that common, I don't know. Third, on account of the danger of vomiting and intemperance, which sometimes arise from overindulging in food. Okay, sure. Yeah, I don't think that's exactly a big problem, but it's good to kind of strip away and to feel the hunger in the heart, right? To feel the hunger in our heart as we approach Jesus, or to feel the hunger in our stomach as we go to approach Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, to be reminded of the primacy of his place in our own hearts. And I think that's really beautiful. Lastly, whether those who have not the use of reason ought to receive this sacrament. Okay, this is a really interesting question, I think, obviously, right? Whether those who do not have the use of reason ought to receive this sacrament. So obviously in the Latin Rite, it's the practice to wait until a person is of the age of reason to receive the Blessed Sacrament. And then this becomes a kind of guiding principle for those who have either lost the use of reason because of kind of severe old age, or because of some tragic accident, or for those who are mentally impaired, who don't manifest a kind of typical rationality. Okay, Aquinas' basic guiding principle on this is if the person can in the present moment or has in the past manifested some recognition, some sense of devotion, some recognition that the Eucharist is Jesus, or is like sacred. Like if they've recognized, obviously they don't have to have all the nuances of like who Jesus is, but if their use of reason is such that they're capable, or they have been in the past capable of showing devotion towards the Blessed Sacrament, then Aquinas says the Blessed Sacrament should not be refused. Okay, and this happens with some regularity. It's really moving. It's really beautiful. And somebody who's later on in life, or who's close to death, approaching death, and maybe their mind isn't there really anymore, but they can still receive food, and like to give that person Holy Communion on their deathbed is obviously a really beautiful and moving thing, because it's like the faith that they expressed throughout the whole of their lives is still manifest and is still present, is still resilient within their soul, even though the use of their brain isn't present anymore. Like there's something really beautiful about the grace that Jesus gives to people, like in those moments in their lives. So, alrighty, see you guys later.